Welcome to the For Fresno podcast. My name is Gordon, and you can watch or listen to all our podcasts at forfresno.com. Well, I want to thank our audience for hanging tight with me the past month or so. Things have been a little busy, and sometimes when you get busy, your passion projects get pushed aside, and I'm still trying to figure out how to streamline some of these podcasts. But we got another great episode for you today. And that's with Christa Wiens. And I'm just really excited to share this because of such the solemn and emotional conversation that we had. Christa Wiens, she works for the Central Valley Justice Coalition as the education coordinator. And so she works with a lot of people who are trying to save human trafficking, people from human trafficking, both sex and labor slaves. And she's been working here for many, many years, and she's got a heart for young people. Her specific oversight is teaching classes, writing curriculum, training and educating people on what goes on. So I'll let her talk a little bit more here in the interview about what is going on. And let's jump right in and hear from Christa Wiens with Central Valley Justice Coalition. Welcome to the For Fresno podcast, and today we've got another great guest for you, Christa Wiens from the Central Valley Justice Coalition. She is the education coordinator there. Christa, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Great. Well, the Central Valley Justice Coalition, I hear you guys do a lot of work, but me and maybe some of our viewers don't know exactly what you do. So tell us what you guys do, and then we'll get more into what you do specifically.
Sure. Yeah. So our mission at the coalition is to partner with the church and the community to prevent human trafficking. And so many of your listeners may not know that human trafficking happens right here in Fresno. And so we partner with a number of different agencies, and there are lots of people in town doing good work to fight against human trafficking. And our specific focus is on prevention. So we do a number of things. We have a case advocate who works with minors who are at risk. We have lots of classes that are available for youth and adults. But our primary goal is actually to respond to trafficking before it happens. So that makes it a little bit challenging sometimes because we can't report numbers of how many people weren't trafficked because of our work.
Right.
But we can definitely talk about shifts in culture that we've seen over 10 years of work that we've been doing.
Well, that's fantastic. It's almost like a Minority Report in human trafficking.
Yeah, right.
Seen that movie, or audience have seen that movie or not. But that's really cool. So yeah, if you can't really show the numbers, but you show over time what happens. So what are some of the things you guys do to help prevent that? I mean, obviously, you can't just fly out of a helicopter and jump out and stop someone from being trafficked.
That's right. Yeah. Well, so much of trafficking occurs because people don't understand the realities. Traffickers are very good at convincing people to trust them. Our culture for a long time has presented trafficking in ways that actually deceive us as public, make us believe that this is a choice and that, someone would want to be there, as opposed to understanding all of the aspects that go into a trafficking situation. So a lot of the work that we do is educating the public to help them understand how trafficking works, how people find themselves in these situations, the ways that we contribute to trafficking unknowingly, and then help us change the conversation for ourselves and for the next generation. Because we also know that youth are largely at risk of being trafficked, that trafficking is the exploitation of one person's vulnerability for another person's profit. So traffickers are really looking for vulnerabilities, and being young is one of those. So we want to try to equip people, strengthen vulnerabilities, help them to understand those points in themselves that might be at risk so that they can find communities that support those vulnerabilities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's great. And you mentioned it is there's multiple types of trafficking then, right? Because there's not just sex trafficking, which I think most of us are familiar with that name. But you said what was the definition again?
It's the exploitation of one person's vulnerability for another person's profit.
Profit, right. So then what types of trafficking are there, and what do you guys focus on?
Yeah, so there's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And underneath those two very large umbrellas, there's a huge variety of different aspects to trafficking. The Polaris Project, which is the largest anti-trafficking nonprofit in the United States, they've identified 25 different types of trafficking under those two topics.
Oh,
so
wow.
Yeah. So we're talking about lots of different industries. And so it is important that we highlight labor trafficking, because when we don't talk about it, we don't know to look for it. But we have found labor trafficking here in Fresno in a variety of different areas. And then sometimes we see overlap where someone might be trafficked for both sex and labor in a situation like a massage parlor, for example. So yeah, we have to broaden our scope a little bit and understand maybe a wider reality than what mainstream media is often promoting, what's trending on Twitter, those kinds of things.
Yeah. So that's a great explanation. The exploitation of someone's vulnerabilities for someone else's profit.
Yeah. Right.
And so what I was going to ask, what are some of those preventions? Can you give us maybe, I mean, I'm sure you teach and we're going to go into it more, but what are some of maybe the top two things to look out for?
Well, we talk about online safety a lot with young people. So what we know right now is that traffickers are reaching out in huge numbers through social media. And so they'll send out, 1,000 messages at a time that say something somewhat generic, something like, hey, that last picture you posted was so beautiful. I love your smile. Have you considered modeling? And if 900 of those young people block that person, that still leaves 100 people that might respond, right? So we talk a lot about online safety, what to do if someone contacts you, what to do if something changes, if you've begun a conversation and then all of a sudden something changes. So working at some of those safety aspects with young people, and then also with their families, their care providers, their communities, to help adults understand, because the reality is most of us haven't caught up yet either. And in this last year, the truth is that children have been more online than ever before, and lots of educators don't fully understand the risk either. So we try to work both angles of educating the youth and also educating the adults who are responsible. So we have a number of classes for healthcare providers, for educators, for churches, for parents, to try to make specific curriculum that will empower them in their roles as they try to protect young people.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. I was just going to ask, you are the education coordinator, and so I would imagine you know a lot about that, which you just said you've got multiple classes, but share a little bit about what those classes are, or maybe highlight some of the ones that are most effective, or how you go about educating the communities.
Sure. Yeah. Our basic class, our introductory class, is called Understanding Human Trafficking. It used to be called H2101. So some people might be listening and think, oh, wait, I took a different class. So same one, Understanding Human Trafficking. It's a 3-hour course. And it really gets into the hows and whys of human trafficking, the realities, and we combat some of the more popular myths that are out there about trafficking. So that's a wonderful starting point that we would encourage anyone to take. We also have a version of it online through Fresno Pacific University and their Center for Online Learning. So if in-person isn't your thing just yet, or you really like the ability to do 15 minutes at a time, the online class is self-paced, and people can take that. They have a year to finish it, and it should still only take them about 3 to 4 hours. So that's a great option for a lot of people. And then we have a variety of classes that we do on request. So at our website, justicecode.org, you can request a speaker and you can see the range of presentations that we do. And then we also have series of curriculums for young people. We run 2 different curriculums, My Life, My Choice and Not a Number. Those are multiple week curriculums where we talk with young people about issues of safety, safety planning, victim blaming, popular culture, and really just try to help have a wider conversation with them.
Yeah, that's great. So what's the response like? What's your success rate as far as people who have taken these classes? Because I know you mentioned over the past 10 years, you guys have been working hard at preventing this, and now you've got these classes, and hopefully the trajectory is changing. What does that look like?
Yeah. Well, in 10 years, we've educated 26,000 people.
Wow.
So that's a pretty big number. We're proud of that. And just a couple weeks ago, we had our first in-person training again after almost a year and a half of doing everything online.
Yeah,
And
good.
65 people show up in person.
Cool.
So what that tells me is this is something people do care about. They want to learn more. It can be a very overwhelming issue, and it can be really scary when we hear sensationalized stories and things. The more people that come and get the truth about what's happening and understand the issue, that the bigger our impact in our own culture and in our own communities. So yeah, we have continued to have steady streams of people seeking education. We are grateful for that.
Yeah. Well, that's really encouraging to hear. You just said the truth about some of the things, and then you said myths earlier. Can you share one myth? I mean, I think it might help our audience, because I have, my I don't know, assumptions about human trafficking and what that looks like, and even some people who live in the, I guess, the system of human trafficking, and they're just perpetually in there and don't feel like they can get out. But I don't know if that's true or not, and I don't know what that might mean. So can you share maybe a myth that might help our viewers just understand human trafficking more?
Sure. Narrowing it down to just one.
Yeah.
So one myth, I think, is that trafficking only happens in certain neighborhoods. When we talk about this, people tend to imagine a particular school or a particular street, or the place where all the motels are, things like that. That's what people imagine. And the reality is trafficking is happening in every neighborhood, all over the city. Trafficking's been identified by the Fresno Police Department in every high school in Fresno and almost every junior high school now.
Wow.
So this is not limited to one particular neighborhood. And if you're listening and you're thinking, well, I'm not sure how this applies to my church, it applies to your church because it's happening in your church's neighborhood. And in some cases, it's happening related to your church. So it's important that we pay attention. There may be people in our churches who are being hurt, and we don't even know it yet. We don't know how to identify it if we're not looking in the right places.
Wow. So what do you think we can do to help our city with that? What's some of the biggest things that stick out to you as far as what needs to happen next?
Well, again, we're an education group. So I think education is the start, helping encouraging our own communities to get educated, to gain understanding, hosting classes at our churches and in our neighborhoods, schools. There are lots of ways to help share the understanding, and then we can begin to change the conversation as well. So language is a big piece. For example, the difference between saying a prostitute and a trafficking victim. Right? That does different things inside of us.
Right,
it makes us respond differently. So, there are lots of ways that we have worked to change language. For example, child pornography is a word that's used a lot, but the reality is there's no such thing as child pornography. Those are child sexual abuse images. So when we start calling things what they are, we shift the way that we think about them. So when we get educated, then we can change our language, and changing our language changes the culture.
Right. Because even those phrases that you just said make things either more or less acceptable, depending on who's hearing them and interpreting them. And using the words like victim or abuse, like you just did, really pulls on your heart a lot more to want to help and figure that out. So,
and hopefully puts the blame in the right place.
Right.
Yeah.
No, that's really good. So I'm going to throw this on you. Maybe we could do a little role playing here, where let's say you're the trafficker and I'm the person that you want to get. What were some of the things that you would say? I know you mentioned online, you might just, you look good in that photo. You could be a model, but if it's in person, what was some things that you would say?
Well, trafficking most often starts with a relationship.
Okay.
So it's not very often a kidnapping or some, get in my car kind of situation.
Yeah.
It's actually usually a romantic relationship or a familial relationship, someone that the individual already trusts. They've worked to build that trust. And so because they've spent even a little bit of time, I mean, sometimes we're only talking about a week, a few days, but enough to make this person believe that they can be trusted. And so then all they need to say is, baby, I love you. I just want you to be with me. I just want us to be together. So let's get out of here and I'll take care of you. Or it sounds like, don't you think you can trust me? Right? Putting some doubt into the other person's mind. Of course I'm here. Or it sounds like, I'm the only one who understands you. I'm the only person that knows what you need and can take good care of you, and I'll protect you. And so that can be just enough to get somebody to go with them, to believe them, to put their, all of the eggs in one basket, so to speak. And traffickers are really good at removing victims from their resources. So now that you think I'm the only person you can trust, you leave with me. And now, your school doesn't know where to look. The neighbors don't know what's going on, right? Like all of a sudden you don't have access to any of the people who might have helped you because you're completely removed.
You're removed. Wow. And when people are being trafficked, I know you said that there's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I'm just more curious on the labor side. With sex trafficking, I think some of the assumptions that people have might be accurate as far as like what is being done, but like what is some of the laboring look like? Do they, are people, kidnapping 6-year-olds to build houses or something? Like what's happening?
Right. Yeah, good question. So labor trafficking is usually happening right under our noses, and we don't know it because it looks like work. But it's work that's unpaid. It's work that's coerced. It's work that someone can't leave from, or they've been threatened that if they were to report it, they would be deported, things like that. So traffickers use 3 methods of manipulation: force, fraud, and coercion. And so in these situations, all 3 are often used. But coercion is the one that sounds like, well, if you don't like this job, why don't I call ICE and we can take care of that, right? And so a lot of labor trafficking here happens like I said, under our noses. But, we have industries like agriculture, which depend on cheap labor. And so we have people who come over intending to work. And then when they get here, the person who helped them come says, well, actually, it costs more to get you here than we thought. And so you can work it off. You can pay me back by working. And while you're here, you need a place to live. And so I have an apartment and you can pay me rent. And then you're going to need a ride to and from the fields. And so you can pay for my gas, right? And then all of a sudden, they're not actually making anything. And the trafficker has taken their documents. And there's no real place for them to turn. They don't trust law enforcement. They may not know their rights. They may have been told nobody's going to believe you or you're going to get sent back. So they're stuck in a situation that they really can't get out of.
I see. Wow. That's pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Jeez. Well, yeah. So I'm a little shocked because I didn't know that was the situation as much. And I'm really glad that you're able to share that for me and the viewers. So with the Central Valley Justice Coalition, you guys have a lot of arms. I saw on your website you're partnering with so many different organizations, which is really, really encouraging. But with that, how can we help you guys if we want to get involved? What can someone like me or who's uneducated? I know you said the first thing to do is to get educated, but how can we get involved, and what would you recommend?
Yeah. Well, you can start at our website, justiceco.org. We do have a lot of information there. You can fill out a volunteer application if you're interested in volunteering with us. We have a wide variety of volunteer needs, everything from in the office to helping us do presentations to mentorship opportunities with young people. There's lots of things that the community can come alongside us in. Churches can host classes. So yeah, we would love for you to start at the website. And then while you're there, you may find that there are other ways to get involved as well, such as evaluating your own purchases. And am I unknowingly contributing to trafficking? Or maybe there's a documentary on our website that you should host a screening of so that you and your small group or your neighborhood can start to engage in this conversation in a broader way.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's really cool. And do you guys reach out to churches? Do you do like guest speaking and classes? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. We actually participate in something called Freedom Sunday, where we encourage churches to partner with us in acknowledging the reality of human trafficking in our community once a year. So churches who partner with us on Freedom Sunday, they may offer a prayer specific to trafficking. They may do a prayer walk in their neighborhoods, or they may dedicate the entire service to inviting us to come and share a sermon or to share a video or to talk to their community. Some churches use that Sunday to host their first class and get their community trained. So Freedom Sunday is one way that we partner with churches. And then we're also hosting a webinar in October. October 11th and 18th, that will be online, and we're doing that in partnership with several other organizations as well. But this webinar will focus on resisting abuse in our own church communities and in our organizations. So we want to make sure that we practice what we preach and that we are paying attention to the needs in our own communities and setting ourselves up to have cultures which respond to abuse in healthy ways.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, you said Freedom Sunday, that Sunday. I'm guessing it's a specific date, right?
It's typically the last Sunday in February, usually the last Sunday in February, but we always tell churches whatever Sunday works in your schedule is Freedom Sunday.
Right. Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I think that makes total sense. You wouldn't want to wait a year, especially now where you'd wait, 8 months or something, or 7 months or something, whenever this podcast is launched. Because it is a today thing. It is an everyday thing.
That's right.
And people need to know. Now, I'm just curious, do you happen to know, I know you said trafficking happens in every neighborhood and all sorts of forms. What does that look like? Is it like 100 people are being trafficked in Fresno County, or is it like 1,000?
Yeah, we have been keeping records for about 10 years. And when I say we, I really mean one organization. So there are lots of organizations at work. So the numbers that we have are really just the tip of the iceberg numbers. We know that it doesn't capture the full picture. Just in the last couple of years, we've tried to expand that work into a data project in partnership with Center for Community Transformation. But all that to say, I can give you a number, and I want you to know that it's just the small part of that iceberg. But we, in 10 years, have identified 1,323 victims of human trafficking in Fresno County. And those numbers continue to increase. That does not mean that trafficking is increasing. It does mean that we're getting better at identifying it. The truth is, it was happening long before we started paying attention and started collecting data, right?
Sure.
So when you see those numbers going up, it doesn't really mean the problem is worse. It actually means some of us are paying better attention.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. And do these trafficking systems, are they also out of town and out of state? Will they migrate people north and south and east and west? And like, what does that look like?
Yeah. Traffickers are really good at moving victims. As I mentioned, it means that we can remove them from any resources they might have. So yeah, they're often moving them out of the city, out of the state. I know that Fresno PD has said they get calls regularly from Los Angeles, from the police department there, that says, hey, we've got one of your kids down here, wow. And vice versa. So so they move them out of the city. They often move them out of state. They sometimes are international. The more you move, the less likely it is that someone will notice, right?
It sounds like they're organized then, if they're in different, or at least they're in different contact with other traffickers, I suppose.
Yeah. No, in a lot of these areas, we're talking about organized crime in the form of gangs, in the form of, a variety of different things. So organized crime is often at play, but not always. Sometimes it's just enough that, often victims are sold in online places. So traffickers can pay attention to where the buyers are and where they're getting the requests, and then they can move what they would say is the supply to meet the demand.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That's horrible and crazy to hear about that.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Agreed.
Well, I really appreciate you opening our eyes to this conversation. I wanted to give you 60 seconds to just share anything that we may not have talked about with our audience that, or just something that you think would be really, really beneficial for them.
Yeah. I'm realizing we didn't say what we're for, and we are for freedom.
Awesome.
We are for freedom.
I apologize. I do ask that to every guest, and I skipped right over that because I was so. This is a very heartbreaking conversation just to hear, and I was just kind of enthralled, and I don't know if enthralled is the right word. I was very attentive to what you were saying, and I skipped that question. I apologize, but yes. Please discuss more on that. What are you for?
Yeah, we are for freedom. We believe strongly that this is what Jesus came for. Luke chapter 4, Jesus' first sermon, he reads from Isaiah and he says, I have come to set the oppressed free. So this is what we are here for. We believe in freedom for all people. And we believe in freedom for both the victim and the oppressor. And so our goal is to see people freed from addiction, freed from exploitation, freed from the belief that one person is a commodity rather than the image bearer of God. So we are for freedom, and we invite churches and faith communities and individuals to join us in working to set people free. Yeah,
amazing. I love it. That's great. And how long have you been with Central Valley Justice Coalition again?
I've been here about 6 years.
6 years. Fantastic. Great. Well, sounds like you guys are doing a lot of great work, and the hard work too. I mean, I'm sure there's days where it's super overwhelming, and I'm sure you and your staff have some great ways to lean on each other and continue the hard work. And I would encourage our audience out there to get educated. I'm very interested in learning more because I don't know very much about it. I haven't been in a situation nor have had any experience with human trafficking as far as families or anything like that. And so, but the fact that it's so prevalent, I would imagine nationwide, we're talking probably hundreds of thousands of people, if not in the millions. I'm guessing, depending on how many cities there are and how organized some of these crime organizations are. So.
That's right. Well, right now, we know that there are over 27 million victims of human trafficking worldwide, right now in this moment.
Jeez. Worldwide?
Yes.
And do you know how many of those are adults and kids?
25% of them are children.
Wow. 25% are kids.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that is a big need. And the church is, I mean, really, like you said, the church is, God is the answer. And we need to be able to step up and help with that. So Christa, I just really appreciate you being on the show. I thank you for just coming on. Thank you for the work you and your team are doing. And hopefully we'll get you guys back on and to tell us more how you guys are doing maybe a year from now or whatnot.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon. I appreciate it. It's good to be here.
Cool. Well, God bless.
Likewise. Thanks.
When we hear content that's so emotional, like the conversation Christa and I had in this podcast, I mean, it's really heart-wrenching. And to hear that there is a need, not only throughout the world, but right here in our city of Fresno, to help stop trafficking. And Central Valley Justice Coalition is working every day to help that. And her role, Christa's role as far as educating people, it's just super important. So if you're interested in reaching out to her or to members of her team, you can go to justiceco.org and look on their website. I believe you can also email them at info@justiceco.org. That's info@justiceco.org. And you can sign up for one of the classes. You can have a conversation with them. You can learn about the resources on their website. And Christa, I just want to thank you again for being on the show. And also thank you for your patience on bearing with me to release this episode a couple weeks later than I wanted to. Also, I just want to thank our listeners out there for just hanging with us. I think I mentioned a little bit earlier that, when you have a passion project and life gets busy, you get pushed aside. And so I just want to thank our listeners out there. I hope to have many more podcasts. I know I've got about 4 or 5 guests locked and loaded, ready to present over the next couple of weeks. But part of the reason why things have been a little bit, I mean, if you're watching, you notice that I'm I'm in our bedroom. A couple months ago, my wife and I found out we're pregnant with our second, and we're super excited. But what that means is a lot of things to do. A lot of the room that was once my office is no longer my office. I think I've moved 3 or 4 times in this house to adjust for the family, and that's just what you got to do. And so I'm super excited. I don't regret it. And maybe someday we'll have a studio if this ever gets huge. But in the meantime, the content that we have here is really important. And so here I am streaming from the bedroom. And that sounded a little funny. Here I am recording podcast content to help our city of Fresno. And I'm really stoked to get back into it. And I just want to apologize to our guests for, taking a little bit longer than I wanted. But hopefully you as the viewer, I just thank you for sticking with us. And again, if you like what we're doing, please rate, subscribe, review. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We post these on YouTube. And you can also, again, visit all of their podcasts at forfresno.com. So I just want to thank our listeners. Our next podcast, we have it's a testimony more, but also a little bit learning about the city of Fresno, and that's with Brian King. And so I want to encourage you guys to tune in, and I'm going to try my best next week. I'm praying next week I can get all the things worked out to launch this podcast. And Brian has an amazing testimony of how God's used him throughout his life. So thank you again, and we'll see you next week. And remember, you matter, your impact matters, because you are the church, and we're here to serve our city.